This is Dwight Nolan, November 1. If you're reading this, it's because my authentication code cleared, which tells you it's really me. Or our adversaries now possess the ability to mine information directly from the unwilling. I guess you'll just have to trust me. So, the situation in that awful cavern. For starters, it was nearly impossible to see outside. Legitimately, the wall of darkness facing us was so thick you could maybe see a few feet. Night vision displayed. Well, let's just say there were a lot of them waiting out there for us. Blackburn cursed as he continued to try and key into the radio, both of us by the front entrance as we heard the gathering storm outside. Theoretically, they could just burst in, tear us apart, and rewire our souls to become a part of them and the new advent. However, in old customs, it stated some vampires cannot enter unless being invited. Spirits as well. Maybe this was some sign of their old world customs still binding them. Maybe they just couldn't figure out how to open a door. Either way, the marshal sat back against the rock wall and took off his hat, the both of us sitting in silence as he let out a long exhale. "Ain't this a fucking tizzy?" he said. He looked to the door, then back to me. "No comms. Figures, cause we're at the epicenter of this shit. But if we don't get ourselves going, we'll be with them soon." 12 civilians. A march the better part of at least a kilometer against all of that adversity. We needed to move. However, doing so was hard. And yet, staying here was slow death. It's like being dealt a bad hand at the poker table. But we can only hold for so long. Eventually, we're gonna have to play. Now, some of you who might have known me for a while might ask, what exactly Isaac and I caught up to? Well, we were in that cave for several hours, initially trying to see if we could physically wait out the darkness. Nothing. Worse so, time was standing still. It was 1:28 AM for what felt like hours. During that time, while Niall and Matsoy checked our rescued persons for injuries, Zeus was sleeping in the corner, and I sat down on a couple of old chairs and talked with the single person I recognized. "The hell are you doing here?" I asked, completely astounded that Isaac was here after 6 long years of not seeing him. "Oh, you know. Well, you don't, I guess. That's why you asked." "No, so I was just going about my day," he says before stopping, his single eye seeming to glance off. I waited for a moment before asking, "Isaac?" Then he said the most off-putting all decade. "Okay, weirdest thing? I can't remember." "You can't remember?" "Nope. Isaac, it has been 6 entire years. How can you not remember?" "Well, I can remember some portions," he says, scratching his chin. "At work down at the local gun store. You know, the one run by those 2 Europeans? Yeah, I was there for a while. Started talking to this one lady. And then one day, she stopped being there." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Yeah, a lot of people did. That town you did all that work in? Yeah, so I noticed when traffic started getting easier to navigate." "Okay, yeah, bad joke." "No, but then, I don't know. I just remember the night sky getting darker. One day, I found myself walking out of town," he said, hands slapping his thighs and giving me a thumbs up like somehow that answered anything. The long minute of silence told him that didn't really solve anything. He scratched the back of his neck. "I tried to talk to Roseanne, you know, the occult woman in town who exorcised rivers and talks to trees." "Yes, Isaac, I know very well who Roseanne is," I say sternly, to which he feigned throwing up his hands. "Well, I'm glad to see you're still you, Staff Sergeant." From across the room, Blackburn spat some of his dip into an empty can he'd been keeping nearby. "He's not the military anymore, guy." Isaac turned in his chair to him. "Listen, once a Staff Sarge, always a Staff Sarge." "So," he then turned back to me. "Staff Sausage, what's been keeping you?" I explained to him the offer I had gotten from PEXU all those years ago, and generally recounted some stories up until then. Isaac would make such intelligent commentary, like saying loudly, "Wait, you fought a Wendigo?" I remember distinctly Matsoy's wife slapped him upside the head. From the way he responded, I guess they got acquainted while in that cell. Something was bugging me though, and I asked, Wait, you said you tried to contact Roseanne. That's when... Yeah, there was a look in his eye when he said it. Didn't work because she disappeared first. These were things that would need to be handled later. For now, I had a close friend back that I hadn't seen. For those who aren't acquainted with Isaac, I'm fairly certain my old blog series might still be up. Regardless, the 5 of us, myself, Blackburn, Matsoy and Niall, and even Isaac huddled up. The marshal was at first to Isaac as he eyed him, looking back to me. You trust this fool? I looked up to see what he was doing. Isaac was having a conversation with a cave painting. I sighed. Yeah, let's just say when the going gets going, he's very capable. That being said, I don't know how Isaac had fared the last 6 years or so. Time for a reintroduction, I guess. John simply looked at the Idaho native, remarking, Well, bless his heart. All of us convened over the table with Blackburn starting us off. We have got to get moving. Those things out there are surrounding us. Isaac chimed in saying, Well, I mean, we could always just wait out the storm. The sun will be here soon. A few of us looked to Isaac as John rolled his eyes. Ain't happening, son. That darkness is eternal. Isaac stopped his chuckling with a, Say what now? We're at the epicenter and caught in the snare. However, our only exit is currently directly in there, maelstrom. Matsoy said, looking back towards the entrance. Niall chimed in, Not the only one, and proceeded to walk over towards a large old wall of the mine. He then punched through some of the rotten boards, and we helped the medicine man uncover an old forgotten passageway. He explained, This used to be the only passage up before the road around was created. They seemed to not have found it. It will cut our journey to our vehicles in half. From there, it'll still be a half of a kilometer journey to our vehicles. Will we be out of whatever this is? I asked. Niall nodded. I looked to John. If we're not in some sort of snare, we can easily handle whatever's out there for a few hundred meters. We consolidated all we had, designated able-bodied persons to carry any of the children or help the elderly. I prepped my night vision as Isaac walked up. So, I don't suppose you've got any firepower for me? I looked to Blackburn, who was placing half a lip of what could be his last can in his mouth. Don't you fucking look at me. I sighed and handed Isaac my Glock and the magazines for it. Don't lose it, and make them count. Keep 'em off the civics. Don't worry, I got you, Isaac said, shoving the magazines into the pocket of his flannel. Isaac, you are a fucking civvy, Blackburn muttered, to which he responded, I am an experienced monster hunter. I saved Nolan's life. Blackburn looked to me unconvinced, which I confirmed. A few times actually. This seemed to settle the marshal's grievances as we prepped. I led first with my Kalashnikov leading the way. The dark, ancient tunnels of the Navajo were as eerie as can be, as the illuminator of my laser traced every possible hiding spot on the white and blue night vision. Just behind me, I could hear Isaac and Blackburn. Matsoy and Niall took the rear guard to make sure no one fell behind. Zeus kept to my side the entire way. Then, the sound of wind could be heard as the faintest moonlight crept in around a corner. Isaac and I quickly cut the distance and panned out, and saw a dark horizon, but filled with the tiniest specks of stars. Zeus's ears were back as he let out a low growl for what laid ahead. We could hear nervous muttering from the rest of the people as they followed us like New Age shepherds. Niall panned out, sighing, We are just barely at the edge of its presence. Where are our vehicles? I quickly checked my ATAC, flipping the device back closed. 465 meters, due our 11 o'clock. Alright, let's go, Matsoy said. Quickly, we all moved as fast, yet as discreetly as we could. With only the slightest wind around us in that black and indigo-covered desert landscape, it seemed as if everything created sound. Yet, we kept moving. Finally, our vehicles were within sight. That's when we heard it. The most guttural, bone-shaking roar I'd ever heard that sounded both in the distance and right behind us called out. With our vehicles in sight, I shouted, Matsoy, get them loaded up. Go, go! I quickly cut to the back to provide any covering support as the herd of people led by Blackburn and Matsoy moved. I checked around for Niall. The medicine man was back helping a young lady escort an old woman, one of the town's elderly. He had barely noticed the presence behind him. He turned to see what looked like a female lead from the dark. With a single slash, some sort of foul substance coated his eyes, causing him to scream. "Contact!" I shouted instinctively as I centered my laser on her and fired. A series of bright 7.62 flashes punctured her and caused her to roar as she melted back into the black. Immediately, I raced over to Niall as Zeus barked off at whatever it was. I grabbed his hand and pulled him to his feet. It looked like oil, although I swear it moved as he brushed it off his eyes. Her strike had cut his skin, and his eyes were a mess of blood. And it. "Can you see?" I asked. He used his rifle to push himself up. "Barely." In my pelters, I heard John yell, "We've got contacts up here." We raced to see Blackburn firing off at shadows in the distance. The Marshal was putting in work with his heavy lever action as Matsoy fired off his short-barrel AK. What seemed to be a dog with far too many appendages broke towards the Marshal. He fired, but his rifle went dry. As it leaped at him, he quickly jutted its muzzle forward, impaling it into the thing. He then quickly hip-fired his pistol, several shots as it screamed and pulled off him before he loaded that thing like lightning and began firing again. Isaac and I escorted the medicine men and the last of the civilians into the vehicles, when suddenly something broke from the dark. It had antlers, rippling muscles, yet somehow a lanky body. I quickly fired at it, and it ducked away as I could see parts of it torn off. Another came from the opposite direction, and I could see Isaac firing away with his pistol. Just then, I turned to see one of them had somehow closed completely on top of me. I fired my rifle, but it pushed the barrel out of the way, shots firing all over the horizon before my gun went dry. I pulled my weapon away. The thing had red eyes, that much I remember. Several jaws all over its body. I remember muzzle thumping my AK into one of them and pinning it to the ground. I then reloaded as I kept it pinned before firing into it as it writhed. "Sarge, we're good, let's go!" Isaac yelled as he and I ducked into the back of the pickup with several of the people. I took a knee and maintained cover as I whistled. Zeus proceeded to leap almost 7 feet off the ground to land inside, crashing into several of us. As we pulled off, I could see them watching from the shadows. We weren't done yet, not by a long shot. Despite this, the sight of a bright sky of nighttime stars and the moon was a boon to our morale. Our small convoy pulled back in front of the police station. Matsoy was helping Niall out as the people quickly left the vehicles, being greeted by several others. I scanned around to see several residents had come out of their homes, including the mayor. Though to be honest, I was too busy pulling off my helmet and catching my breath as I sat on the cap of the truck, Isaac petting Zeus. There was misery and merriment, all of which was silenced as the mayor shouted in Navajo as he approached Niall and Matsoy. From what I could see, he kept gesturing to his watch. I then decided to check mine, and I realized why he was so angered. We had been gone for several days. Matsoy then pointed to the marshal and myself, the both of us dropping down as we approached Altsay. "He tells me you were ambushed," the mayor said, calming himself. "Shit, we were fucking trapped. It's way worse. You don't have infiltrators. You got a whole goddamn invading army." Blackburn barked. I nodded. There was not much more I could add, but we barely got out with everyone we had. The new advents laid their claws in your home, sir. Matsoy then nodded. They were giving their bodies as vessels. All we found of them were husks, and that was nearly a dozen. Who knows what crawled out of them? It seemed the mayor had calmed and brought on to the same page. He looked around and asked, "What happens now?" Matsoy seemed stumped as he controlled himself, finally having seen the proof of his woes. He stopped. Genuinely, he probably didn't think he'd get here. Blackburn looked to me. "You know what I'm gonna suggest." The mayor raised an eyebrow as I stepped forward. "Sir, they're coming down from that mesa, and they're gonna besiege this place. You'll have more of those things here than you will living people. My advice, get everyone to the best defensive position, and we call in a PEXU SMU. Your people may not have wanted a full unit down here. But you got enough creepy crawlies down here to usher in the new rapture, and they did a number on your guy over there, and he's custom made to mess with witches and wendigos." Isaac said from the bed of the truck. Altse seemed to pause for a moment before asking, "Who are you?" "Isaac, friend of the staff sergeant. He said with a smirk and pointed to me. He might have worded that strange as hell, but he's right, the marshal said. The mayor looked around, allowing a moment for time to stand still as he took a single exhale. He nodded and patted Matsoy on the shoulder. Order everyone to the center hall. Get them into the concrete cellar. Tell them all guns. Altse ordered his police chief, which caused several of the male residents of the town to whoop and holler as they ran off. He then looked to Blackburn and myself. If you have any friend you can send, get them down here. You have our permission. Roger fucking that. I quickly walked off as I left my helmet and rifle in the truck, telling Isaac to keep watch. Blackburn pulled out his keyring. I'll distribute our goods. You get on the line and tell that Brit to send whoever he can. I quickly fished out our SATCOM, hooked up the tripod and antenna, connected it to my personal radio, and... November 1 to Maine. There was nothing but static and silence. I tried again. November 1 to Maine. Radio check. Any station on this channel? This is November 1. Radio check. Over. Finally. November 1, this is Maine. Sit rep. Over. I'd never been so glad to hear Montgomery in my life up until that point. I gave the down and dirty. There was a lot of back and forth, but I cut to the point. We need a full unit down here. There are far too many parafor for us to handle. November 1, tonight there are several coordinated attacks. Many of the units we had in the North American AO are tasked out. We may not be able to reinforce you. How copy? I cursed. At this time, some of the people and Isaac had seen. The latter kept watch as I barked back. Maine, this is November 1. If you don't get someone down here, we will be outgunned, undermanned, and you're looking at a worse disaster than Tipton, and the Navajo Nation is vilifying us for it. How copy? Over. After a moment of silence. Wait 1. Over. I stood there, staring into the sky, wondering how long until the stars above disappeared like they had in the desert. Before finally, I got a response. November 1, this is Maine. You have additional forces en route. SMU Raider is approximately 45 mics out. How copy? 4th Special Forces Group. A detachment of Green Berets currently led by an old friend of mine, Nicholas Walker. Yeah, that'll do. I copy all. November 1, send any new data. And good luck. I quickly grabbed my gear and staged my Vic near the center hall. A concrete building with vivid paintings of the people's history spread across in chipped blues, orange, red, and yellows. If I wasn't working off institutionalized muscle memory, I might have taken a moment to stop, as the story of the entire Navajo people was laid out through better and worse times. I guess this was another chapter for them. What would happen next would decide if it would be a good one or not. But it wouldn't be the final one. The sounds of nearly 4 dozen people rushing down the stairwell towards the back of the building could be heard as I entered. What was a carpeted center room now had all of the furniture pushed to the windows and around the door in makeshift barricades. Matsoy and Blackburn quickly unlocked the equipment cases from the church, as the marshal lined up at least a dozen incendiary and stun grenades. The Navajo police chief quickly unsealed some cases of ammunition. You two brought more with you than my station stocks. I checked with Niall, whose wife was busy cleaning his eyes. He raised his head instinctively to me. Nolan, are your friends on their way? This was also the first time he addressed me by my name in a non-insulting manner. Yeah, they'll be here soon. He seemed to resign to the situation, sitting back with his weapon on his lap. Well, let's hope this final alliance stands better than the last. Matsoy seemed to be working a mile a minute as he scanned around. Not everyone's here, but we'll have to do this the old-fashioned way and go block to block. I grabbed my weapon, checking it as Isaac jumped to his feet. I'll volunteer too, but 2 guys in a dock isn't enough for the whole town. That's when we heard the door open. Remember those townsmen who were all too energized to be called to arms? The nation's people are extremely well versed in their old warrior skills, as several were professionally armed with everything from a modern rifle to an old-school bolt action, handguns, a chas rig, and all. Matsoy gestured to them. Dwight, my men will assist you. Roger that. Oh, one more thing. Isaac? I said, kicking over a gun case to him. He quickly opened it up, pulling out a Remington 870 that Blackburn had prepped with a sight saddle, light, and extended tube. Don't you fucking break it, the marshal barked. The last thing he said before grabbing a bandolier of shells was, Wouldn't dream of it, Calamity Jane. It was a strange feeling of the past, hoofing it down the dark streets with a vest and ACH with knots on, flanked by the armed locals as they quickly went door to door. Many of them knew who lived nearby, who would probably still be at home. We worked efficiently to comb the streets. The town wasn't that large. We burned maybe 16 minutes before we were certain no one was around. Taking stock, I stopped at an intersection as Isaac and the Navajo militiamen quickly posted up behind nearby vehicles, stone walls, around corners. November 1 to Bravo 1, I said, trying to reach Blackburn. I could hear him, but it was broken up.
Dwight, we've signs of seeing south side,
is all that came through. I looked around, our group getting restless as we stopped. I tried again. Nothing. The same level of interference we had at the mesa. I took a look up, and sure, the stars were getting dimmer. Then, contact. The sound of tearing metal could be heard as we canned the road northwards. A wooden plank fence with old red paint was slowly torn apart as spindly limbs punched their way through. What pulled itself over and through was this amalgamation of what looked like calcified roots and tendrils, weaving together in some horrid round form. A single haunting face like that of a wax figure whose jaw and chin melted together poked through. It was at least 3 meters tall. Then, more sounds, from the gangways and yards. We were right at the head of an assault. I immediately fired off a burst of rounds, firing into the thing, causing a reverberation. It felt like my skull shook. Several of the others were feeling it as they fired off, some aiming towards distant sounds. "Pick up, we're moving," I ordered. We tried a bounding retreat, but elected to just turn and burn when we heard an additional noise to our right. The quick-paced sound of metal being smashed, chain link being torn if that's possible. Something in us kicked in, and we realized we were outnumbered and surrounded. Despite this, some of the Navajo men laughed. One of them with a souped-up AK like the one I was using, firing off a few shots as I could hear muffled prayers under their breaths. I set one too. We were going to need it. I daringly took a look back to see that thing gaining on us, fast, and I mean really fast. It seemed to somehow be able to pull itself 10 meters at a time. Suddenly, one of the men at the front of the group had his legs snapped. He dropped to the ground as he and his weapon were dragged back. I grabbed his hand with my offhand, aiming my AK at the thing, which was just halfway down the black. He screamed, and I could see why. The tendril has metal barbs protruding out of it that dug into his flesh like 1,000 fish hooks as the sound of his skin tearing could be heard. Isaac placed his boomstick onto the thing and fired. The material tore away as it howled enigmatically. I helped the guy hop back along with another militia member as we hauled ass to the center hall. "Open the hell up!" Isaac called out as the doors opened and we bolted through. Quickly, a designated field medic in the form of the town doctor took the man to a triage bed, quickly looking after him as Blackburn, Matsoy, and several others took to the windows. "I was trying to reach you. Camera's been going dead all along the south side." Blackburn walked over. I switched out my magazine. "We took contact from the north, John." "So, both ends of town closing in," the marshal noted. Then, the sound of something landing hard on top of the concrete building, causing the lights to flicker, caused everyone to stop. Dust fell off the ceiling as Zeus was barking like a madman. Isaac looked to Matsoy. "I don't suppose you got anyone on the roof?" Then, almost instantaneously, the lights went out. I quickly flicked down my dual tubes. John produced a set of digital NVGs of his own as the both of us scanned around. Immediately, the backup generator for the building kicked in as dim orange lights gave everyone else some light. Matsoy immediately shouted to his people as everyone stood fast. Then, the laughing. I remember something like that back in the forests of Missouri. I don't think what is out there has a concept of humor, but they know exactly what rattles us. Like a chorus, both verbal through the shadows outside and inside our minds. Suddenly, the sounds of dozens of them crawling all on the outside. Suddenly, through the metal places and furniture placed against them, one of the windows broke. Then another. Then the doorknob started to turn as the howls began. "Stay put. They're trying to off-put us," I warned, looking around at the different entrances. "Yeah, well, consider it achieved," Isaac quipped, taking cover behind a cabinet as he aimed his shotgun. It's then that Marshal Blackburn walked up to one of the barricade, shaking his head. "Nah, not for me." He then pulled the pin on a flashbang, throwing it just outside as he and some of the Navajo defenders took cover. Normally, they're not as bright as you see in movies, but due to the sheer black outside, it seemed like a flash of white coated outside. It also gave us a small glimpse of them. All of them, contorted, demented forms as whatever they were, destroying the physical sense, the sanity of whatever they inhabited. Gaping maws, slender yet ginormous forms. Their laughing stopped, and they started to roar and yell. Isaac was the first to fire as one of the entities tore through an entire cabinet, its arms lined with spikes, as its skin was missing, gray and lifeless. A blast of buckshot cast her back. At the other windows, the Navajo quickly took up arms and began to fire off, Matsoy commanding his people. I was running throughout, aiming my laser and taking shots to help where I could and fill the gap. One of the militiamen had his shoulder cut when a hand, just a hand, reached through and grabbed hold, then proceeded to rip a chunk out of him like he was wet paper. I dragged him back to the 8 area with Matsoy, reloading my weapon. "Nolan!" A voice through all of the loud gunfire and yelling could be heard. I turned back to see the mayor, Altsay, holding. Well, first, he seemed to have thrown on one of his old dicks. Old school BDU camo, green and black, a chast rig that the Vietnam Rangers used to rock, as in his arms was an M60, gas-operated air-cooled belt-fed machine gun. "Where do you need this?" he asked calmly. Blackburn fired off his lever action as he ducked back around the window to the wall. He looked up as he reloaded, pausing. "Where the fuck's that pin?" "My property is my business, lawman. Now, where do you need it?" Altsay reiterated. Just then, the sound of something big began to slam on the front doors directly in front of us as I aimed my Kalashnikov. "Right here should do." Whatever was out there had the clean mass of a trunk, as the concrete shook and even cracked at the edges of the front door. Zeus assisted by grabbing the neck of one of the things as its contorted skull poked in, keeping it in place as Isaac unceremoniously exercised its skull. Suddenly, the center doors came loose. The metal warped as one of them nearly fell off. A hulking mass of what looked like limbs started to crawl through. The thing in the road. "Gun hot!" Altsay yelled, with the M60's bipod mounted onto a large trough box. He took aim and fired a burst straight through the metal. Blackburn and several others ducked back as the sound shook the building, red and white streaks tearing into it as black substance flew all around the door. Another burst. I took aim and assisted, as did the marshal and several others. The king beast withdrew with a roar. Torn off limbs fell through the mass of metal that was the entrance. One of them twitched and began to crawl, causing one of the medics to panic as a knife was planted into the palm by Nyol. "You back to shape, old-timer?" Matsoy asked as he cleaned his blade. "Just barely." The things outside began to crawl around, shaking the building as the sound of tearing metal could be heard. Then, a sound from one of the walls. Matsoy's eyes raised. "They're entering through the air system." I took lead with several others, including Isaac. Zeus sprinted off towards the basement stairs as the dim lighting was even worse. The cellar was an open concrete area. The townsfolk were huddling near the edges. We reached the bottom. Suddenly, through the HVAC unit, we could hear something messily fall through. And from the vent, it burst out. Miniature versions of the things began to spill out, messily, trailing their black blood behind them. One leaped for some of the civilians. However, Zeus quickly leaped, pinned it down and gored it. Another was skeet shot out of the air by Isaac, who fired on the vent and turned it into a messy bottleneck for them. The Navajo defenders and I quickly took aim and fired. I stumped one before firing into another. One of the men grabbed one and whipped it into a wall as another jumped on his back. I took aim and shot it off with a single shot. Then, one of the last of those things leaped for me. I turned and saw it hit out of the air by a metal bat, then pulverized by Matsoy's wife, who was guarding a group of the town's children. "Careful, Staff Sergeant," she quipped. "Nice one, Sarah, was it?" Isaac quipped. She rolled her eyes and responded with, "Glad to see you're still topside, Isaac." "Technically, we're on the ground," Isaac said. "Shut up." From outside, a loud noise could be heard. Originally, we thought it was yet another creature attempting to gain entry. But I immediately knew what that was. Aircraft. Specifically a helicopter, and the literal best thing we could hear at that point, causing me to outright laugh and pump a fist. Isaac seemed confused. I don't follow. Those cultists didn't give me a lunch. Kinda lightheaded. That's our backup. Log addendum added. Processing. Author. Captain Walker, Nicholas, SMU Raider of 4th Special Forces Group. I've been asked by the brass to give my perspective of our quick response deployment to the Navajo Nation. This is Captain Nicholas Walker. For those reading, you'll have to forgive me. I'm used to writing up orders and debriefs, planning missions, and my after-action reports are dry. But I'll give as best of a retelling as to what the hell we encountered down there. We were on QRF tasking when we had gotten the alert. We seem to be doing a lot of that, probably because our specific team of America's finest happens to be able to adapt the best against Parafor and their unusual circumstances. Regardless, multiple alerts had been given out, and some of our sister units in Canadian JTF-2, 1st Ranger Bat, even a unit of FBI HRT based down in Virginia had been spun up. The new Advance routes were tightening around us, and missions were more frequent than the 07 search. We expected something to pop off and give us a reason to roll out. I just didn't expect it to be an old friend. Montgomery's words, somewhat exactly. A joint mission to bring the Navajo on board has gone completely bloody foobar. We've got several solos stuck down there with reality warping entities having torn a damn hole in the county. They'll be overwhelmed if they don't receive immediate assistance. Local liaison is the town's chief, Matt Soy. Solos tasked are US Marshal John Blackburn and Dwight Nolan. I'd recommended Xavier to bring Dwight in, especially after he went toe-to-toe with whatever the hell he found back in southern Missouri. He was an absolute firebrand of a squad leader back in our line unit. Got it done, but also kept his guys' heads above water mentally. Him and I kept contact tangentially. However, I reached out after he joined with PEXU, and I wasn't too surprised he started tearing through target packages left and right. He may not say as much, but from a cohort of his looking in, Dwight Nolan has eliminated cases as a solo than some groups of them failed to do in the greatest quantity. So if his ass was in the fire, let's just say me and the boys were suited up, radios prepped, and out on that tarmac before the coffee was hot. Our ramp brief laid out a clusterfuck ahead. Inward communications limited, up for unable to see on ISR, drones unable to regain visual on town due to supposed wall of darkness. I flipped my notes, keying back in. Contact on entry is likely, though birds will take us in. I closed my boot and shoved it back into my rig's pocket, eyeing one of the door gunners, an M134 minigun, chamber in good ol' 7.62 NATO. I've seen those things bisect vehicles faster than you can register. If there's one thing I've learned about my time with the unit, a healthy amount of well-trained warfighters is equivocal to anything that crawls out of the primordial ass crack of this universe. We quickly entered the airspace of the town. Our knots were down, but we couldn't make out a damn thing. Legitimately. I knew what they meant by wall of darkness because the clouds soon vanished, and a void is what greeted us. The crew chief came back to talk.
We're still able to make out altitude. Once you're on the ground, we'll be unable to provide air support.
Not the best. The last thing we'd want is a Black Hawk going down because it hit a damn light pole in a Navajo town. Try explaining that on the news, Xavier. Soon, we felt the rotors stabilize as gravity reminded us we were still on Earth. We exited right side, half-crescent formation as we all took up our sectors. Our comms sergeant chimed in. Short-range communications were still up. The leader of my Alpha team, also the one who keeps you updated on 4th Group, Staff Sergeant Ivensky, kept all sectors scanned. Our warrant kept a lookout with a thermal as the birds left us in total darkness and silence. That was until we could make out gunfire. A lot of gunfire. We expected our forces to still be engaged, though we didn't expect the distant sounds of rounds like the better part of a line company going at it. The sound had the same effect as the cold. Too much of it too far, and it seems silent. But whatever was going down pierced that veil. Our people were still alive. Our medic doc said something akin to, "Hell yeah, give 'em hell."
Ivensky, have Alpha pick up. We're fucking moving.
I ordered. Without hesitation, his team led the formation. We were on the edge of town, so the second we saw structures, cars, anything anyone could hide in, our lasers were trained. Our warrant kept chirping in my ear.
This matches the stories I've heard about the aeolaer.
We moved carefully as our quad-knots had trouble piercing the darkness, though we quickly made our way to one of the streets. We'd been emplaced on the north end of town.
The hell are you talking about, Chief?
I barked, keeping volume low.
Our projected up 4, when they enter our world in great numbers, their entryway sucks all energy back into it. I see no stars and no sun.
He nodded. I looked around. He was right. Though as he noted,
that's just a working theory.
We hugged a stone half-wall, keeping eyes on a nearby Vic and house as we moved through, following the firearm thunderstorm just south of us. Ivansky's alpha team immediately snapped to action. I saw them quickly take cover behind a nearby car, aiming down the road as I can hear them through the comms.
Contact! 5 para 4 front!
I immediately hoofed it. Sure enough, 2 that looked like hybrids of canine and corpses. Some sort of marionette, all charged, talons, bones reaching out as they closed the distance quickly. Was nothing we couldn't handle. I saw PEX lasers on targets, cutting them down even if it did require an entire magazine each. Another leaped from one of the roofs, though Alpha's gunner took it out with one hell of a burst, showered us as well. Doc didn't hesitate to complain.
Damn it, I just got that shit from West Tennessee out of my kit.
Bravo team bounced up as Alpha replenished and fell in. We could see the damage these things had done. Torn up fences, cars had been smashed, though it seemed as if they moved quickly with a singular and controlled path of destruction. They weren't here for slow conquest. They needed to decapitate any resistance. The hellstorm we could hear ongoing was just that. Pieces of calcium, rotten flesh, flaked skin littered the ground.
Seems like the locals did a number.
Bravo's team leader, Sullivan, noted. Chief disagreed.
There's no brass. This wasn't a firefight.
He noted. I looked over.
So what's your theory then? They're molting.
Soon, we reached the center of town, where the gunfire emanated, though as we approached from the east side of the center hall, we could see tracers and hear the whiz of outgoing rounds. We immediately hugged the nearby concrete wall, not wanting to catch blue on blue and become a folded flag. Our comm sergeant tried to reach them.
Friendly units inside? This is Raider Romeo.
Nothing, yet fighting could still be heard. One of our guys stupidly tried to peek around to see and nearly caught an AK round that tore off a chunk of the wall with a spray of brick, his team leader Sullivan yanking on the carry handle of his kit.
Don't lose your head, guy,
was all I could say. Swear to the Lord, best of the best, but those 18 Bravos run off of nothing but adrenaline and tren.
What's the play?
Chief asked. They were barricaded, and from what we could assess carefully, multiple parafor along with a larger creature were around the entrances and possibly made entry. From a careful cross angle through a hole in the wall, I could observe smaller ones acting as dismounts, I guess, breaking off of a larger entity all over the perimeter. They were flooded. We needed to relieve pressure off of them, fast. Luckily, we had all the firepower we needed.
Break the siege. Bravo, deploy a star cluster and flare to let them know we're not flash eaters. Alpha, bound out and we'll take the center of the road. Draw that big son of a bitch off the top of the roof.
Without hesitation, Sullivan immediately slammed a silver canister into the ground. A bright burst of pyrotechnics bathed the road ahead as Ivansky's team stormed out and took the center, posting up behind some vehicles. All outgoing fire towards our direction has ceased, meaning our signal was received, even if chaotically. I rushed out, following behind to the far side as we saw it. The thing was some mass of yarn, but instead of yarn, it was limbs, spinal cords, and its face looked otherworldly. Let's just say it had all the right functions to see, smell, and speak. And those forward-facing eyes, all of them told us it was a predator. It dropped off, limbs and flesh falling, showing the damage it received as we engaged. A burst from the belt fed, and our grenadiers immediately started to put rounds on target. Though I warned,
don't hit the fucking town hall with a 40.
Through the hailstorm of teams talking off of each other's bursts of fire, an HEDP found its place directly in the center of its chest, guts and entire bodies spilling out almost like we popped its sternum. We did. It rushed us. A SWAT and several calcified talons as big as .50 rounds nearly hit us.
Jesus!
was the only thing I could hear from Doc as he ducked behind an old fan, watching one of the projectiles embed like a damn ballista bolt. We heard yelling as miniature versions I had seen crawling all over began to advance.
Multiple smaller Para-4 inbound.
Ivansky said as the teams began to engage. A burst from an M48 cut down a group of them as our rifles went to work. Some of them managed to make it towards us. I saw one of my men thrust their muzzle clear through a chest cavity and fire, earning a splatter all around. Another one of my grenadiers went dry, but quickly drew a sidearm and domed them. The bigger creature advanced, and with its mini-legion attrition down to casualties, we were able to re-engage as it was within 10 meters.
We good to deploy frags?
One of our guys checked. I get why. Collateral. No sign of any friendlies so far. And if they were on top of the thing right now, they were insane and dead anyways.
Fucking send it.
I set the standard by deploying an M67, landed inside one of its gaping wounds made in its body, causing a splash and rain of it. Another member of Bravo deployed an incendiary that caught its front limbs on fire as it started to emit a scream that piqued the dampeners on our pelters. Yet, eventually, the thing began to lose balance, falling as its centipede-like structure caved in, and yet its howls continued. It still roared as we advanced. Bravo pushed right and fired on the smaller ones that were still crawling and began to check the front of the building, while Alpha and I approached it. Its ring of eyes looked up, hatefully, as all we could smell was char and rot. I aimed my Scar heavy and put enough rounds to pierce its crown of a skull.
Lead to all raiders. Advance to the center hall.
Lock addendum ended. Seeing Walker and his green-eyed devils emerge from that red and smoke-filled street was the best thing we'd seen throughout this long hell. Immediately, there was crying, cheering. Some, like Blackburn, slumped against the walls. As Altse and I emerged, Zeus immediately ran up as Walker's men took point. The captain seemed to chuckle at the sight of the dog as their warrant pat him. Flipped his squat nuts up. "Nolan, up shit's creek I see." "Regular circumstances, yes." We shook hands, just glad for the majority of our people to be the ones in mostly one piece. "You special forces?" Altse asked. Walker eyed the patches on the mayor's jacket. "Formerly 10th, but yeah. You're at Stewart?" "Bless your soul." I could see their warrant officer positioning guys. One of their teams quickly went around the building, confirming that Para-4 with 2 rounds each, as their comms guys started to set up an advanced antenna. That's when Isaac caught up. "Is it true those things cost as much as a house?" he said, gesturing to Walker's night vision. The Atlanta native eyed me, then back to Isaac. "More like a truck, but yeah. Who are you?" "Isaac," he said, resting his shotgun on his shoulder. Walker then rolled his eyes. "This one is Isaac?" "Yeah, that tracks." Closing up now, as there's a lot of fallout from that. Things within the surrounding towns have stabilized. Whatever we did worked and seemed to have retreated. For now. Our ties with the Navajo Nation have strengthened, as that alliance, baptized in fire, has encouraged both sides to work together more closely. It was a necessary bridge that needed to be built. Better late than never, I suppose. That being said, it seems our victory's gotten a lot of them pissed off. New advents Ryan Evans just came on the news talking about a new effort to unite the people. Flanking him were senators, charity relief founders, representatives of the Red Cross. It's going to get worse before it gets worse. I guess when one side finds allies, so does the other. That being said, we're in this for the long run. Don't believe their lies. Hope isn't dead, even if it's knee-deep in a foxhole. PEXU works in the dark, and I'll be back soon. With Isaac, Zeus, and the Marshal. Stay safe.